All right, let's get to our top story on this second hour of Morning Joe. Donald Trump is again suggesting his political opponents could be jailed if he wins re-election as retribution for last week's guilty verdict against him in New York City. In an interview with the far-right network Newsmax last night, Trump continued to claim he didn't receive a fair trial, complaining the jurors never smiled at him. He also threatened to prosecute his perceived foes, including former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, who had nothing to do with the verdict against him.
Mother Teresa couldn't get a fair trial here. I said that. And no, you couldn't. I never saw a glimmer of a smile from the jury. It was a trial that everybody said shouldn't have been brought, including Bragg didn't want to bring it. Nobody wanted to bring it until I decided to run, and then was beating everybody by a lot, and then was beating Biden by a lot in the polls. But, you know, it's a very terrible thing. It's a terrible precedent for our country. Does that mean the next president does it to them? That's really the question. Wouldn't it be terrible to throw the president's wife and the former Secretary of State, think of it, the former Secretary of State, but the president's wife into jail? Wouldn't that be a terrible thing? But they want to do it. So, you know, it's a terrible, terrible path that they're leading us to. And it's very possible that it's going to happen to them.
Yeah, so there we go. Once again, Willie, Donald Trump threatening to jail his political opponents, as he has repeatedly over the past several months, several years. What's so interesting is that, again, here's the big lie that Donald Trump tells about these prosecutions, all the prosecutions against him, Willie, is that... is Willie there? Did Willie leave?
He's here.
I was.
No, we got
there
Willie.
He is. Oh, good.
Hi,
Willie.
Monty. Yeah.
Give you a second. I've been talking about Willie since 6:03. So anyway, in 2019 on this show, we said if Donald Trump lost, he would run again for re-election to avoid all the prosecutions against him. When he ran, there was open discussion about why is Donald Trump running again? The answer was because if he runs again, he will be able to say that all of these prosecutions that are coming are politically influenced. So we all saw this coming. People all saw this coming. For him to now say, oh, they're only coming after me. For his allies to say, oh, they're only coming after him because he's running for president, actually has that backwards. He ran for president because he knew he was going to be prosecuted.
Yeah, that's the bet. If he wins, it all goes away. And he's actually outside of the case that was just decided with the 34 felony guilty verdicts against him last week. He successfully has used delay tactics, his team has, to probably get these pushed past the election. He thinks if he wins, Merrick Garland's out, he puts, I don't know, Don Jr. in as Attorney General or something, and everything goes away. And Jonathan, there is actually, Axios has a little bit of reporting this morning, quoting Steve Bannon, take it for what it's worth, but a voice of a MAGA world saying that they're going to go after Alvin Bragg first and try to put him in jail. So, you know, this is, a lot of people go, oh, it's Donald Trump popping off. It's what he does. He's calling into Newsmax. But you got to take this stuff seriously, given not only who he is, but who he has surrounded himself with.
Yeah, we've learned that when he makes a threat like this, we have to take it seriously. And what's different here, I mean, there's been Republican anger for years now. They claim the witch hunts against Donald Trump. But what's different about this verdict is just how out in the open it is and how they're not trying to be subtle. There's no euphemisms here. There's no sort of like, let's be clever. They're flat out saying we are going to go after those who have done this to Donald Trump. Yes, Steve Bannon talking about Alvin Bragg. We have Speaker Johnson, the House Speaker, yesterday saying they're going to look at the Department of Justice and try to defund a lot of what it can do as payback, they say, for the Biden DOJ going after Donald Trump. Now, of course, there's a limit to what they can actually do, but the threat is still there, and it erodes Americans' faith in our institutions. This has been one of the most dominant themes, Mike, of the Trump era, is going after, perceiving, whether it's the FBI or the media, and they have singled out those of us there as well as targets for retribution, and trying to get Americans to say, hey, look, they're not on our side, they're for them, and really vilify everyone, and it's putting us in a very dangerous place.
the most dominant aspect, I would suggest, not one of the most dominant aspect. And you know, largely this is my personal view now. But at some point, Americans have to ask themselves, what kind of a country do we want? And on this particular day, it's almost sacrilegious to be talking about what Donald Trump said and what he means and what he's going to do. We just spoke to a man who just finished a book on Eisenhower, talking about the night before D-Day, when General Eisenhower went through the 101st Airborne, shaking hands, and he knew that every other hand he shook was a young 18, 19, or 20-year-old paratrooper who was going to die within 12 hours on the beaches in Normandy or in St. Mary-Glise, somewhere in Normandy. We were going to lose a young American. Why were they going? They were going to fight for democracy. All these years later, 80 years later, democracy is again in peril. That's a fact. That's a fact. Listening to Donald Trump, that's a fact that we have to live with. And that's a fact that Americans are going to have to make up their minds about. What kind of a country do we want going forward?
And John, we may hear some of that theme from President Biden tomorrow at Normandy when he delivers his address. He'll be there all week, as you reported yesterday. He'll be at Belleau Woods later in the week, the World War I site, which is sacred to the United States Marine Corps. He'll be there all week talking about the young men who frankly saved the world in those days, weeks, and months, but also about bringing it to today and the threats to democracy here.
As Mike said, it's hard not to almost be emotional thinking about this scene with Eisenhower talking to those paratroopers. We're going to hear the president several times this week. His remarks tomorrow are actually going to be, I'm told, relatively brief. He'll be one of a number of world leaders who will speak on the D-Day anniversary itself. It's the next day, the Friday, where he goes to Pointe du Hoc, which is where Ronald Reagan delivered his famous speech, where he's going to deliver a major address, talking about yes, the sacrifices of 80 years ago that helped save the world, but connecting it to today, the battle we're seeing in Ukraine, but also just the need to affirm and rebuild democracies across the globe. And I'm told the odds are against him invoking Donald Trump by name, but Trump will shadow this speech as he will draw an implicit contrast to the future that Trump would bring versus the one that he would. One with allies, one with defending democracy. We certainly know Donald Trump would take a very different approach to the Ukraine war, were he to be returned to office. We know he almost pulled out of NATO a few years ago on the eve of going to Helsinki and siding with Putin over his own government. We're going to hear that in grand terms, Joe, from President Biden in what aides tell me will be one of the most important speeches he delivers this year. One that will not on its surface be a campaign speech, but is going to lay out some of the most important themes of the election ahead.
Yeah, and Caddy, we just talk about the choices. Mike talking about the choices. We talk about the choices. We hear what he said about Hillary Clinton. You have Jonathan Lemire talking about NATO. Of course, Donald Trump trying to undermine NATO, said he wanted to undermine NATO, said a couple of months ago that he encouraged Vladimir Putin. He would encourage Vladimir Putin to invade NATO countries if they didn't have this sort of defense structure that he wants them to have. Of course, he talked about putting Hillary Clinton in jail, throwing political opponents in jail. His people have talked about throwing us in jail, throwing people that run this show in jail. They've talked about throwing media companies in jail that are insufficiently loyal. He talks about executing chairmen of the Joint Chiefs of Staff who are insufficiently politically loyal to him. He talks about terminating the Constitution. He talks about using SEAL Team 6 to execute political opponents and says that he would be immune from that. He actually had his lawyers argue that in court. You can go through all of it, and it is it's extraordinary. It's extraordinary that this man is talking like an autocrat, talking like Putin, and that right now this race is too close to call.